everyone. Thanks so much for joining me for this week's episode of When I Grow Up. On today's episode, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Jumi Yi. Hi, Jumi. How are you?
Good. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for being here. I know that you have probably long work days, and for those of you that don't know, we do most of my interviews at night, and so I appreciate your time, especially being a mom, a working mom. So thank you again.
No problem.
So let's get started. So I'm going to call you just Jumi. Is that okay?
That's perfect. Please don't be formal.
Oh, yeah. I always feel bad though, because I do have a lot of friends that come on and they have the title of doctor like yourself, and it is a title worthy to be called because I know how much time and energy and work has gone in the years that have gone into getting a title of doctor. But all that to say,
oh, that's so kind.
All that to say, could you tell us what it is that you do?
Sure. So I am currently in regulatory affairs at Merck Pharmaceuticals. And actually, it's just called Merck. I shouldn't really say pharmaceuticals, but it's a company. In any case, I just started it in August of 2020. And prior to that, I was a pediatric infectious disease physician.
Wow. Okay. I was not prepared for this as much as I should have been because, well, first of all, it's interesting to me that you started working there in the middle of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So what was that shift for you? Why did you decide to switch jobs, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because it probably applies to a lot of people who are listening to you. But one of the things that I started thinking about during my career is what are my next steps? And I came to a point where I wanted to learn something new. And I don't get me wrong, medicine is ever changing. There's always something to do. The patients are fantastic. But for me, I kind of hit a point where I was just wanting to learn something new. And this was all, just something I wasn't expecting. But I got a call from a recruiter from Merck, and they asked me if I'd be interested in interviewing for this position in regulatory affairs. And I found it very interesting because I actually have a background in clinical research and vaccines and some teaching. And I was just really attracted to the fact that in regulatory affairs, like you liaise in my job specifically with like the FDA and other agencies, but then you get to see the whole product kind of come to life. So you get to see the research side, you get to see the manufacturing side, you get to see the commercial side, you get to see the patient side. And so for me, I just liked that it took what I was doing, but then shifted it to a different focus, but I would still be learning something entirely new. And I'm not even exaggerating when I say it's entirely new. It's been a huge learning experience for me.
Oh, wow. That's so crazy to be able to take something like that on, especially so far into your career as a doctor, and still be learning new things. So you mentioned the learning curve was quite large for you in doing this. Are you in a place now where you feel a little more comfortable in regulatory affairs, or how long did it take you to kind of be in a place of like, okay, I think I got what's going on now?
Oh, is that supposed to happen at some point? Sure. No, but I think that's what I like about the job is that, I kind of got thrown into this position, and I'm working on a vaccine product, and I know what it is, I know what it treats, I know that the impact of it, but then the behind the scenes of like preparing the package, so the submission, so that it is something that is something you can give to the agencies and say, hey, we have a great product and we should be licensed, all those things. Like that part is just ever expanding. Every time I learn something, there's more. And so I'm at a place where I feel like I definitely know what I don't know. And I'm still at a place where I'm growing and learning. So I don't feel like I'm in a place where I can say, yeah, I'm ready to go on to the next thing. But I certainly feel like I've come a long way since I've started.
Yeah. So I guess I'm not going to even pretend I know what it means to be in regulatory affairs. So would you kind of maybe start from the beginning? Like what does a typical day look like for you? And like what exactly does regulatory affairs mean at a company like Merck?
Yeah, so that's a great question, I think. And so for me, I like my job because every day is so different. There's no
Mm,
real like day to day, like clock in, clock out. And I think kind of going back to medicine, that's why I also like medicine because every day would be so different for me. It might depend on the type of doctor you are, but for me as a consultant, like every day was just different. I never knew what I was going to get. It's kind of like Forrest Gump. Life is like a box of chocolates. No, I'm just kidding. In any case, for regulatory affairs, so generally what I'm doing is it depends on what life part of the life cycle of the product you're in. And right now I'm kind of in the later phases where we're heading towards licensure. And
mm,
so we're completing our studies to support our vaccines. We're looking at, we're working with our commercial colleagues to look at the timing of when we're putting in our application. We're talking to our different country colleagues to see how does our filing affect like their filings, like what sorts of information
mm.
could they use. And so it's quite a broad scope. Yeah, so basically, if I kind of boil it down to what I do is I'm the person that kind of is the go-between from the company to the regulatory body. So in the case of the US, it would be like the FDA.
I see. That's an extremely important job. And, I only know that now because I mean, I didn't really care about vaccines before the pandemic, if I'm honest, right? Because, I mean,
No,
other
that's
than the flu vaccine that I get and the vaccines I get, my children get, but those have been, you know, processed and approved for a long time now. And I
mhm.
think, at the at the height of vaccine for COVID-19 and things like that, like I had a lot of questions, about the process of how things get done and why is it so fast and everything being happening so quickly. But um, all that to say, it's amazing that you get to be in a place where you see the drug and the process of it being where it's supposed to be to help other people. And I think that's really cool. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's really neat. Like when you take a step back and look at what you're actually doing and the
Right.
impact that you have on people's lives, it's incredible. It's like like in the hospital you get to treat a couple patients at a time, but in this capacity you really get to affect a lot of people. So I've been, I guess, when you go into something new, you don't exactly know what you're going to get into, and you kind of have notions about what it might be like. But I've been really pleasantly surprised at how much fun it is, and how much there is to do in this space.
Oh wow. So um just to clarify as you're talking, so when it gets to you, it's already a vaccine, right? Like you're not like making the vaccine, correct?
I personally am not, but the company would be like they would come
Okay,
up
okay.
with a product, and then when I'm involved is yes, like when you're starting to think about how are we going to develop these studies that are going to start the process of getting it down the line to being licensed.
Okay.
I'm not in that super early phase where you're in the lab and you're looking at the molecules and all those things.
Okay. I see. Um I don't know if you're allowed to elaborate on this because I'm sure it's all sensitive information. However, like, um, what are some, if, okay, sorry, I'm just trying to think how I want to ask this.
No, yeah, take it.
Um, like, what are some regulatory things for a vaccine? Like, why wouldn't it get approved?
Oh, that is a great question. So, I mean, it would really come down to like your process. So, the one thing that I don't have strong knowledge on yet is like the manufacturing piece. So, in our company, actually, we have a separate group that does the more like what we call CMC, like the chemistry manufacturing, that kind of side. But that for the vaccine, that process itself is the vaccine because it's so complex, and what you do on that side makes the vaccine.
Hmm.
And so if that process is not well controlled, or like your product's not pure, or it doesn't work very well, then you can have problems. Like if the
Mm,
studies that you run in patients, they're not well designed. And I guess a good example, and this actually might be a little bit inflammatory to some people, but like, you know how all this information about different um, like hydroxychloroquine and all these things have come up about using it for COVID. Like those are not really like controlled trials or like, like as carefully done. But anyway, so the, that may be a reason like you're not getting approval for your product because it's not done in such a manner
Mm.
where you're thinking about like all the statistical implications of what you're studying. Trying to put it in a simple manner, but I think I'm just starting to ramble a bit. In
No,
any case,
I
um,
understand what you're
yeah.
saying. I understand
So,
what you're saying.
or like safety could be a huge problem because the mantra for everything is first do no harm, right? So you have to make sure it's
Mm,
safe. And then the other thing would be like if it doesn't work, then you can't use it. It's great if
right.
it's great if it's safe, but if it does absolutely nothing, then what's the point? So
I see. Okay. Um, okay, that was great.
I mean, those are
um,
some reasons. There's multiple reasons, but those are just kind of some of the off the top of my head that I can
no,
think
and
of.
I think those are all without really going too deeply into it. I mean, it's common sense, kind of, like obviously you're not going to provide a vaccine to the world or medication to the world that has not gone through the process itself to see if it has effective results. So, yeah, it makes complete sense to me what you're saying.
Yeah.
Um,
But even if you think of like what happens to get it to the like studying in human phase,
uh-huh.
you have those people who are studying in the molecules in the lab, they're putting it into animal models and checking the safety there. And I mean, there's just so much that goes on before you even reach the person. I mean, I think it's just fascinating how all this works.
Mm. Um, so there are a lot of steps before it reaches person.
Oh, a ton. And then, we always think about it in the sense of like, there's like tens of thousands of things that could be really cool to use in people, but then, out of those, only a very, very tiny percent actually make it to the point where you get to like a clinical trial that might help someone. And then even out of those, there's a small percentage that actually make it. So it's pretty rigorous and
Right,
yeah.
right. Um, I'm curious, like for your job specifically in regulatory services, um, do you need to be a doctor?
No, actually, I don't know of many companies that actually hire MD straight away like this. I think Merck has had an investment in physicians, which I
Oh,
find really interesting. But most people have some sort of regulatory experience or some sort of educational experience that kind of brings them to the space. And so
hmm.
I've met a lot of colleagues who are PhDs or they've had experience in the manufacturing side or they've had some sort of industry experience that brings them to the space. But
I see.
yeah, so how I came into it is actually, from what I understand, not as common.
I see. So do you find it advantageous to have an MD in the space that you're working in?
Oh, I'm biased. I think it's advantageous to an MD for everything, right?
Yeah,
No, I'm just kidding. But
you're
yeah,
absolutely right.
no, I actually do because I understand, what these products actually do. I was
Mm,
talking to someone about one of their products and they're look they just got on this project and they were talking to me about it and then I gave her some of the background of this product and she was like, oh yeah, that's right, you would understand what's going on there. So it's kind of nice to have that baseline because it then helps you anchor onto something and be able to understand why the processes are the way they are.
oh wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, So, if you don't mind, could you actually take me back to when you decided to be a doctor? Like, what was that like for you? I mean, I would even say, like, could you take me back to high school, like before you entered college?
Yeah, sure. So I actually knew I wanted to be a doctor probably in elementary school. It's
Oh,
always
wow.
yeah, I've always wanted to do it. And it kind of stemmed from number one, I've always loved science, but I love interacting with people and
Mm,
with medicine, that teaching aspect is really cool. So medicine really kind of marries all those interests. And then it's funny that you chose high school as a time point because I remember with church we did a mission trip to Mexico and those tend to be, like you do a couple of community service projects or whatever, and you come back and yay, we did a great thing. But for me, what really stuck with me was just all these like children and people who seemed like they had illnesses that we really couldn't tend to, or and then
mm.
when I went to college, learning more about the sciences, and I also volunteered in a malaria lab, I started like learning about the importance of disease on human health and how it really just impacts your day to day, right? Because if you get an illness and you can't work, then you can't bring food on the table. There's a lot of factors that go into people
Sure.
not being able to do things, but infectious disease is kind of one of them. And so for me, medicine seemed like a natural path. And then I actually chose pediatrics for medical school. And I don't know why, actually. I think it's because it was the one specialty I did not hate. And I hate to say it that way. Like, I actually thought I was going to do geriatrics because I really enjoy elderly people,
Uh-huh.
but I did not like their medical problems, like their laundry list of medicines and just this like game of like balancing medication. And I'm sure any other doctor that you've talked to who's in adult medicine probably is like, she's crazy. But yeah, that just didn't jive with me. And then I also really enjoy the surgical specialties, but I didn't enjoy like the life of just being up all the time, and I don't really function very well like that. So I was like, oh, peds, kids, like who doesn't love to get a sick kid well? And so there's a little bit of naivety going into that. And then when I was in pediatric residency or training, I had a mentor who is one of the big names in pediatric infectious diseases, and she scared me to no end because she just like she pushed us. She was like, she expected nothing less than perfection. And I mean, that was just one of the best mentors to have, because like
Mm.
in that I saw how much she cared about us. I saw how much she cared about her patients. I saw how much she cared about, medicine and the science of it. And everything she did was with like such great care and integrity. And
Mm.
so I started just meeting with her and just kind of going back to my experiences in college, and also in medical school. I did some more like missions type work in Southeast Asia. And so all those things kind of culminated together. And my mentor one day, because as you can see, I can be kind of indecisive, because I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this. And she was like, look, if you want to do infectious diseases, which is an additional 3 years of training, she's like, you should just go for it now. I mean, sounds like you're really interested in it. There's no way you're going to know for sure until you do it. And
Mm.
so it was just kind of the little push that I needed. And yeah, I took a little break to just work as a hospitalist for a bit. That's just a doctor who works in the hospital setting. And then I went to fellowship, and it was great. I mean, it was really, really intense, because you come in, you've had your pediatrics training, but then you've had this like kind of broad scope, but then you're going really deep into the subject. And
Mm.
it's really tough, because as a fellow, the first day people kind of they know you're training, but at the same time you're expected to be the expert, So um, during that time, I also did some like research in diarrheal diseases, and I met my mentor, who I ended up actually working with as faculty at Emory, where I started doing clinical trials and doing clinical work there as well.
Oh,
And then,
wow.
yeah, and a couple of years later, I ended up in Oakland, actually, there after I got married to my husband, who lived in San Francisco. That's a whole nother story. But yeah, and then I was the fellowship director there for a bit, and I was doing clinical work. And then that's around the time I was thinking, I'm not sure what my next steps are. And then this happened. Yeah.
I see, I see. So I'm going to ask you some questions about what it is that you did in pediatrics infectious disease, but
Sure.
um, my first question that comes to mind, and even actually thinking about, just children in general, and I'm a little more biased now because I have my own children. But what makes a disease infectious? Like, what is that category?
It's an infection, right? So anything that a virus, a bacteria, a parasite, a fungus that causes an infection that is not supposed to be there, it's in your body.
I see. So this is
Yeah.
not like the cold, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right. A cold is an infection, but that would be more the general pediatrician that would see
Okay.
something like that. But
Okay. Okay.
that's an interesting point that you make. So, like, we do get consults for things like kids who have recurrent colds or illnesses, where the pediatrician wants us to look a little bit deeper and make sure there's no immune system problem. But typically, those are kids who are just being kids, like
I
they go to
see.
daycare or wherever, and they're just getting
So,
sick.
oh, I'm sorry to interrupt
Oh,
you.
no, no, you're fine. So,
Um, I was gonna say, um, at, so a kid would come to see you as a specialist if they had, um, an infectious disease. Then it's not like the common cold, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, no, that's
Okay.
correct. Yeah, or
Okay.
a suspicion of one, or sometimes actually we would be the first people to like see a kid that we're suspicious for cancer, or a kid that we're
Oh.
suspicious for like lupus, or because a lot of these things present with fever, or a lot of things present with like symptoms that are bizarre, and infectious disease tends to be the one of the first consultants that people reach out to.
Oh, wow. Okay, so what kind of clinical trials were you doing? Can you talk about those?
Yeah, so I was part of a clinical trials unit. I was working with this excellent mentor at Emory, and we did a lot of clinical trials that were funded through the NIH. So there were a lot of like early phase trials and things like influenza. We actually did one of the Ebola trials. And so we did a lot of vaccine work there. So early studies where we recruited patients to see is this vaccine safe, and then also a little bit of could this work, and then it would advance from there. We also did stuff in kids where we looked at serious infections in kids to see like what the epidemiology or kind of like what that might look like within the kids in our area. So it's a huge variety of things, but all infection related because they're
Mm.
vaccines.
So, do you miss working with kids and doing that kind of work, even being where you are now?
So I always miss the the part of medicine that's near and dear to my heart is actually the hospitalized kids. So if I'm being completely honest, I could do without clinic because those kids are typically fine. But the
Mm.
hospitalized kids are the ones that are sick. They're the ones that really need attention, and that's where the interesting kind of conundrums come from.
Mhm.
So I do miss those kids. Research was really fun because you get to answer a lot of questions that are unknown, and
Mm.
the amount of like thought and care that goes into that is just it's just really neat because then you get to also mingle with a lot of people who are the experts in their field, and it's just fascinating. So I do miss that aspect too. I will have to honestly say I do not miss the hours. So it's like 24/7 weekends, everything. So this, yeah.
Really?
So this is, you know,
S-
yeah. I mean, like carrying a pager is tough. Like getting woken out of sleep is tough. Like working weekends and then not sleeping is tough. I mean, most doctors I feel like are better at it than I am, but I'm honestly a little bit sleep dependent. So it's been a little bit of a relief.
No, I totally
Am I
get
allowed
that.
to say it?
Yeah.
Well, I'm saying it, being recorded. Sure.
No, 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 no. This is great. Transparency on this podcast is
That's
always
right.
welcome.
That's right.
Um, but so okay, like, and again, as you're talking about your job, your previous job, what comes to mind is just the little I know about that kind of life is because of the TV shows I watch, right?
Oh man, I wish medicine were as cool as TV.
No, I feel like it probably is not that far off, but
Yeah.
so have you come upon diseases where you could not identify like right away and
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
so what is the process, if you don't mind me asking, like of you starting to do the research and look for what it is that's going on for this child?
Yeah, so I mean, it's not just me, doing the thing. So what happens usually, let's say you have a kid who's hospitalized, and one of the doctors who's taking care of them will reach out and say, "Hey, I have this kid who has XYZ, and can you come see them because we need a little bit more expertise or help thinking it through." So these are like really bright people who are like trying to kind of bring, and it won't be just me. I mean, sometimes it's straightforward, it's just me, but for those kids who we really can't figure it out, it'll be kind of like a collection of doctors from different specialties looking into it. And so, when you're when with anything that you do, it's always information gathering, right? So you go to the source, you go to the patient if they're old enough, the families to talk to them, even if it's written in the chart. Like you want to make sure that you talk to the parents or the kid and figure out the sequence of events, like what happened, because most of the time you can actually kind of extrapolate what happened there. And then
Mm.
in the infectious disease side, we always think about like what have they been exposed to, what are, like certain things that could predispose them to a certain infection, and what is there anything suspicious about their medical history or things that they've experienced that may be suspicious for an underlying condition, like an immune compromising condition that could predispose them to some serious infection. And then you like obviously do a thorough exam of the patient because sometimes there's clues there. And then we look at like labs to see is there anything we can gather from there. I know and I say it that way because I know a lot of people think, oh, why don't you just send a test and figure it out? But the
Mhm.
test should always support, what you've gathered from talking to the patient and what you've figured out from examining them.
Mm.
And then after that, you kind of basically compile your information together. And sometimes you go to the literature and you look up any studies that were done
Mhm.
on this. If it's like something rare, then there may be some like reports about it.
Mhm.
And then if you feel like it's kind of out of your wheelhouse, there are other people that you can talk to. So we're never doing anything in isolation. And within the groups that I've been, we always actually discussed our cases once a week to see if there's any additional ideas from people. And if it was complex, we would always bring in others to talk through it too. So, yeah.
So, you know, after doing all the research, I would imagine there are times where it's difficult to find a solution, right, to whatever it is the
Mhm.
disease might be. But like, what do you do? Like, you must have to take some sort of action in order to start treatment. Are there just like drugs in order for you to start doing that, or do you get what I'm asking you?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great question because there are certain things where we really don't know what's going on with a person and we'll try different things. And so we'll kind of go with like, oh, I think this is most common, or I think this is most life-threatening, because you certainly don't want to miss something that's going to kill the patient, right? Because there are other things where you can kind of take some time and figure it out. Um, so it's a matter of like triaging what you think is the most important and most likely. And sometimes honestly we're wrong. And then later we find out that it was something else, or we never find out. Like
Mm,
sometimes there are things that we just don't find out. And that's that's the completely frustrating part, right? Yeah. So I mean sometimes it can be one of those things where we just don't have an answer. And I always tell families at this juncture, like we're trying to communicate everything we know, that
mm,
it's highly frustrating not to have an answer, especially since it's your kid. I mean,
mhm,
I can't imagine what that is even like. And
mm.
yeah, so yeah, you're right. We just have to pick something and go with it, but it's always thoughtfully thought out, and what we believe is the best path forward. And
Yeah,
usually by that time, you've discussed it with a ton of people.
I see. Man, yeah, I mean, I would imagine it's extremely frustrating, especially when um like dealing with not dealing with, but for lack of a better term, dealing with, family members and people that care for the patient and,
Hmm.
them kind of being like, well, you guys are supposed to know. And I'm speaking from a little bit of experience too,
Yeah.
because
Oh, what happened?
oh, well, okay, so it was really bizarre. Like, long story short, David and we were in Boston on a short trip, and when we got there, he started breaking out in hives, okay? But we
Oh,
didn't know what it was from. And then by day 3, we were about to leave to go back home to Atlanta, and he was literally his whole upper body was like swollen and covered in hives, right?
oh,
And I
bad.
think I don't know if we picked the wrong hospital. I just chose the one that was closest because I was like, oh, surely like they can just make sure everything's okay and we'll get on the plane, right? As soon as we got there, people like masked up, like, and I was like, what about me? And they're like, you're already exposed, whatever it is. And I like freaked out, we weren't even married then. And yeah, and they said you can't get on a plane because it started spreading all over his body, and it looked really. It started blistering. It was really bad. I remember they did bring in infectious disease at one point, but um, but I also remember being like no one being able to find an answer.
Mhm.
They think it was an allergic reaction to a medication that he was on previously. But I remember being extremely frustrated because, well, one, I hadn't slept very much since we got there, and then he wasn't getting better, he was getting worse, and I remember going to a resident event and I just like started crying because I was like, why isn't he getting better? Like, are you guys treating him well? Like, like I just didn't know. And so but and also the reason I kind of asked you that question about, you don't know the answer. So what do you do? And I was worried, because they didn't have an answer, but they said they're going to start him on some sort of steroid, and I'm like, well, what if, X, Y, and Z happens? And I just would imagine it's a very difficult place to be because really I should have been thanking them. They're really just trying to help. Um it was just so I mean like I thinking about you and the place that you've been, especially working with children, I'm sure you are doing everything you can, and then you just, you don't have all the answers, but you do have a lot of them. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I know what you're talking about. The syndrome is like actually unclear cause, but it does self-resolve typically, but does get worse before it gets better. So yeah,
Mm,
I think that's hard. That's really hard, like, situations like that, because it's hard to explain it to like a
right,
person who's
right.
yeah, I'm sorry that happened.
Oh no, I mean he's great now and it's
Yeah.
fine, and I'm just glad, we avoid that medication at all costs now. I
Mhm.
still don't know what happened, but I just remember that um I just walked out of there thinking, I am grateful. I am grateful for doctors that are really trying their best to help in those types of situations where no one has answers. Um but uh okay, so I have another question for you as a doctor, not as a person that works at Merck. Sorry.
That's fine by me. I feel like the doctor thing is probably more, honestly, more relevant because I've been doing it for so much longer.
Right, so how long did you do that before starting this job at Merck?
So when did I graduate med school? You're making me think, which is sad.
It's late, sorry.
No, I just can't remember years very well. I think I completed residency in 2010, and
Okay.
then I completed my fellowship in 2014, and then I came here. And so 6 years of like practicing infectious diseases, but before that was like training in pediatrics and infectious disease.
Um so, as an experienced doctor, I've had a doctor on before in like general medicine.
Mhm.
But for some reason it didn't occur to me to ask him this at the time. But for those listening that maybe are thinking about going into the medical field, specifically to be a doctor, um, yeah, like have you ever lost a patient before?
Oh yeah, I'm not many times, but yes.
So like,
More than I'd like to say. I mean, it's devastating.
yeah, so what is the impact like for you as a doctor?
Oh, I think that's a great question. It's hard because it's not that you can spend time to mourn the patient. A lot of time, at least in the infectious disease side, it's a kid that you've been working with for a really long time who's
Mm,
very, very, very sick. And so you really do build ties with that family and the child. And so it it's hard, but then it's not like you can say, "Oh, I need to take a day off because my patient died," or that you even have enough time to reflect. You have to go see the next patient, and you have to I
mm,
mean, it's not like the kid who's, in the ICU really understands that, "Oh, hey, actually, I need time to process this." You don't really have that luxury.
mm.
And so
Yeah,
I
I
think that actually leads to a lot of burnout and fatigue in a lot of people because, you're kind of expected to just be this, like almost machine in a sense. So yeah, that's really a difficult part of medicine and other specialties where they deal with it much more than I did. I don't know how they did it
mm.
or how they do it.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like with my personality, it would be hard for me to
Mhm.
kind of package things up and just move on. But I know that's part of the job that you have and as a doctor. And so I've actually never asked any doctor that before. And so I was curious to how, so like, I know you say you move on and because you have no choice, right? But,
Yeah.
I mean, like, is it difficult for you to like leave that at work? Because I don't know. I feel like I would
No,
take a big.
I still think about them.
Mm,
Yeah, because I mean, these are like people, right? These are like
right.
lives that were lost and people that you really cared about. I mean, they're not your family, but like
Mm,
you're involved in a very intense part of their life, and it's not like the doctor like stays in the room for like hours on end. Because I feel like the nurses are the people that you see the most. I mean, you're probably aware that they're the ones who do like you're more like every couple hours checking in on you and stuff. But like as the physician, you see the patient, you're assessing them, but then you're also like, man, what is the best thing I can do for this person? And you think about that like all day, and then when something doesn't work out, then you do this whole like, oh, what could I have done for this person?
mm,
And then you think about the families, and you're like, oh man, their lives are so different now. They don't have this person in their life anymore, and so like at least for me, like you just carry that burden, and
mm-hmm,
it's
mm-hmm,
and it's hard to like let that go.
mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that brings me back to where you are now too, like the ability that this job has given you at Merck to kind of be a little more, I mean, I don't want to say more impactful. That's not what you're doing, but just kind of have a further reach in the regulatory services, I think
Yeah.
really speaks volumes, and wanting to do more. And I think it's really cool. It's so cool. All of it's really neat. um,
I
well,
agree. I think it's super cool.
yeah, I mean, like, so we talked about a lot of cool stuff in your job, but are there any challenges thus far in what you're doing currently at Merck, or like, is there something that you don't like?
Oh, love absolutely everything. People at Merck are listening to this, right? So I love it. No, I'm just kidding. I think for me, because I like to work very collaboratively, the pandemic situation of working at home has been really strange because I've even, in the pandemic, I was taking care of patients with COVID, right?
Mm,
And office, you still see the patients, and you talk with your colleagues. But here, it's you have to make a bit of a more you have to make more of an effort, and so that's been my biggest challenge.
mm,
But I feel like I have a great team who's been very supportive. And then the other thing that is hard for me personally is no longer being the expert in my field because I'm kind of starting over again in a sense. And so it's interesting to hear people talk about disease states, but I don't get asked about them because they just assume that we're all kind of like baseline, not physicians and stuff like that. So I find that part interesting. And
mm,
then the other thing would be I am not used to having like managers in the sense of like answering to somebody. I mean, there's always like like a division chief or someone like that, but like a lot of what I did was very independent. Like
mm,
I made a lot of my own decisions within the realm of like I know I was supervised or whatever, but like here it's like a bit more hierarchical. So that's been a bit of a transition for me. So I'm learning how to navigate that and what the right processes are. So yeah, just like being involved in like the day-to-day process is very strange to me. It's not necessarily bad. It's just I'm not used to it. And so my husband actually makes fun of me all the time about it.
No, I mean, if you're not used to that, that's really difficult to do, I feel like, especially if you've been working kind of like, autonomously and people
Yeah,
trust you to do what you're supposed to do, and then you have to
right.
answer to someone. It's really challenging.
Yeah, I mean, a good example, I guess, that is like I have to log my time, but I'm like, why in the world does anyone need to know what I'm up to? I'm working like, like all day doing stuff related to what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I know it's a way of accounting for what people do, but I've never done that before. So I find like that piece really interesting.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. My husband he has to do the same for his
Oh,
work,
really?
and he like kind of, complains about it. He's like, I mean, like why does like do, like we're obvious if we're the work is done, what does it matter?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's funny. That's a really good example though. Um, so okay, um, I guess we kind of touched on it a little bit, but since we talked about kind of the challenges, what do you love most about your current job?
I really like that I get to interface with kind of all aspects of the company and the
Mm,
process to go get the vaccine done. So if we kind of go back to where I was with the pediatric infectious disease side doing clinical trials, like there was the science part, there was the like interfacing with my colleagues and our study nurses and learning about the product and engaging with the science. And so that part was really cool. But here I get to see like, okay, so we have this product and we have the people who are in charge of running the studies. We have the people who are in charge of the manufacturing. We have the people who are in charge of like the promotion, which honestly, like the business side, I'm like, I think it's fascinating because it's not a side that I've ever been familiar with. And then, so it's like all these different groups that are doing different functions to like work together to make this a reality. And so I love
mm.
being in the mix of that.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean,
Mm,
that's like my heartbeat really, just to be a
yeah.
part of something bigger than myself. Like,
Yeah.
I get that. That's amazing.
Yeah, and you think, at a pharmaceutical company like Merck is one, but like let's say like Pfizer or some other ones, like, people are like, oh, they're just out for profit and all that stuff. Sure, that's always part of the equation because you can't run a business without money. But at the same time, like the people within the company are just like so driven to help others. And I'm not even kidding you that they talk about this. Like people will step back and they're like, look, we're doing this for patients. Like we really want to, change people's lives. We really want to contribute to the community. That's why we're all here. And I mean, the work has gotten quite busy, and so people are getting tired in a sense. But yeah, that's something that we always kind of come back to, and I think that's been really refreshing and like good to remember.
Hmm. No, thank you for bringing that up because I will say, I think even myself, I have this sort of, um, yeah, stigma. Like, I hear the word pharmaceutical company, and for
Mhm.
some reason, I have this not like a negative attitude towards it. So I thank you for bringing that up. But I think that's just what the media paints and into the public. But um, as much as maybe I believed before that people are part of these companies to really help others, you saying it brings a lot of light and truth to
Mhm.
something that people need to know, and so thank you for saying that.
Mhm.
Um, so one last thing, actually, I wanted to ask you, again, it doesn't have to do with your current job,
That's fine. You can ask me whatever you want.
but you mentioned that I don't know why it didn't occur to me, but you mentioned that you were working with COVID-19 patients, before you transferred to this job.
Mhm.
Now, were you working with children then, or
Mhm.
just
With
okay?
children. Yeah, I know in the East Coast, a lot of pediatricians actually had to work with adults just because adult units are like overflowing. In the West Coast, the pandemic kind of like hit it more slowly in a sense, and
Mm-hmm.
so our wards are relatively free of adults. But yeah, the kids had that MIS-C syndrome that you hear about with that very inflammatory syndrome and got quite sick. So it was a different kind of disease presentation. There were some, that had the breathing problems and um, yeah, but I feel like the adults really did get a huge hit. So that was just really tough to see. And just seeing like those patients with COVID just face to face, to me, like it just felt almost unnecessary, especially since there were things that we could do to minimize the impact. And I know that discussion has gotten a bit political for some reason, but I don't even know why that needed to be the case. But
Yes.
anyway, we're not going to go there. But yeah, I
We
mean, that was
can
just
if
like
you
what always
want.
came to mind is like we could have done a little better for these
Mm,
kids. Yeah.
yeah. I thank you. Thank you for being on the front lines. I am so grateful for doctors like you, Jumi.
Oh, thanks. But
Yeah.
I unfrontlined a while ago, so yeah, I'm really
No,
grateful.
you're on a different
Yeah.
front line now.
It was a little different.
Please.
I'm at home doing
No.
this, but like I am just so grateful to my colleagues. Like I cannot even imagine what their day to day is. It's a lot. Like I know people who haven't taken vacation in God knows how long, and they're
Mm,
working all these weekends, and it's just because they want to make sure that you know, like people are cared for.
yeah.
It's just really crazy. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I do truly believe that you were on a front line that, other people can't even imagine to be a part of. And so I'm thankful for that as well. No, I'm serious. I'm not
Yeah,
just
thanks.
saying that, I feel like a broken record at this point. I tell all of my guests, like, the things that they do, I don't even think about. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even imagine that there's a job for this. And that's the whole
Yeah.
point of the podcast is that, um, to bring light to areas and careers well people don't even realize are a possibility. And I feel like regulatory services at a pharmaceutical or sorry a
Yeah.
yeah pharmaceutical company like Merck is not even, I don't know, for me it's not an option that I would have chosen like high school or even thought about, right, or a goal to have.
Oh, wouldn't have thought about it
Yeah.
either. Well,
Yeah.
I think that's my kind of my story is that you're never too old to try something new. And I don't think that you should underestimate yourself. Of course, your skill set should reflect what you do, but I don't think that like stretching yourself and like going for something different that you're not entirely comfortable with
Mm,
um, is a bad thing. Wait, did I
yeah.
say that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's really good to just like challenge yourself and try to grow wherever you are. And yeah, there's just so much to do out there, right? So yeah, I
Yes. That's like extremely sound advice. And I was going to ask you, that's my next question, before our time together ends tonight. Do you have any other advice, maybe for someone that's thinking about going into the medical field or has interest in working um, in the area of regulatory services or any advice at all? Just life advice. You just gave a really great piece of advice, but do you have anything else?
yeah, I guess if you're thinking about medicine, like really count the cost. And I know that sounds almost ominous, but medicine is quite intense. You know, it's four
Mm,
years of additional medical school plus like 3 to 4 years, depending on the subspecialty or specialty that you choose, plus additional training for any subspecialty, and some of the surgical specialties are even longer. And so it it's really important to know why you want to do it because I'll go back to a story that I had with a person that I knew quite a long time ago, and he asked me who makes more money, doctors or dentists, and I was like, if that's your focus, then you cannot be a doctor,
mm,
because the amount of investment you put into your career is not worth the means at the end. And I promise you, if money is your outcome, you're not going to be happy.
mm,
And so I would say count the cost, but also like it's such a rewarding profession because man, you get to really be in people's lives, like a part of people's lives that even their families don't know, right? Like people
mm.
are the most vulnerable when they're ill or speaking to their doctor. And so it's such a privileged space. Um, and then for regulatory affairs, I mean, I just got into it. It's such an interesting profession. It's not something that I feel like is necessarily a career goal or path, unless you're like, man, I've heard this podcast. This is what I'm gonna do. But but if you're really interested in like drug development and talking with regulatory agencies such as the FDA and seeing that whole process come together, or if you're a global minded person that really enjoys science, I think it's an excellent field. Um, and of course, like what I just talked about, those two fields are very challenging, but incredibly rewarding in the sense of like nerding out on science or like, being able to collaborate with really intelligent people and also like making an impact on people's lives.
Mm,
And then in general, I would say, like what I said before, don't be afraid to stretch yourself and go for something that doesn't seem like quite up your alley. And the other
mm,
thing I would also say is that there's never a time where like if something is interesting to you, I really feel like you can figure it out. Like everything takes work, everything is hard to do, except maybe laying around the house. I don't know. Sometimes that's hard to do too, but everything is actually pretty hard to do. If it's something that's worth doing, I do feel like it's difficult in a sense.
Yeah.
And I would just say, just keep at it. If it's really something that you find passion in, that just you wake up and you're like, wow, this is cool. Like every day is not like, you're like jumping up and down and birds are singing and squirrels are brushing your hair. But at the same time, when you look at your job and you're like, this is really cool. Like if you feel that way about something, I would say just continue to pursue it and work hard. Yeah. And don't give up.
Yes. All really good and sound advice that everyone
I
should
hope
take
it
in
sounded
right
nice.
now.
We'll see.
No, seriously. Jumi, thank you so much again for sharing your heart and passion for what you do. And I really appreciate the time that you gave me today. So thank you. I know you're probably a busy woman, but if there's somebody that maybe has a question after listening to this podcast or maybe has some interest in some of the things that you talked about, would you be okay with me connecting them to you?
Oh yeah, that would be great. I'm always happy to talk to people who are interested.
That's awesome. Well, you guys, yeah, I make it a point to kind of ask all of my guests if they're willing to connect after hearing this podcast, and they're all always so willing. So please take advantage. It's an opportunity that I think I wish I had when I was growing up. So thank you again, Jumi. Thanks, guys, for listening. Until next time, bye.
Bye.